Sir, if you'll step right up here, please, if you'll raise your right hand. You swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Yes.
Thank you. If you have a seat right there, please, sir. If you'll speak up in that smaller black microphone there in front of you, that'll help me hear. And if you'll tell me your first name and last name and spell them both.
Rick Insell.
Mr. Insell, tell us where you live, please, sir.
I live at 106 White Cloud, Murfreesboro, Tennessee.
Okay, sir. And what is your occupation?
I'm the head women's basketball coach at Middle Tennessee State University.
And how long have you been the women's basketball coach?
7 years.
And prior to that, were you involved in basketball?
Yes, sir.
And tell us where you coached.
I was the girls basketball coach at Shelbyville Central High School for 28 years.
All right. And prior to that, were you a coach?
I didn't coach.
Okay. And where are you from originally?
Woodbury, Tennessee.
All right. Did you know a person by the name of Tina Stewart?
Yes, sir.
And how did you know Miss Stewart?
She was one of my basketball players.
And if you would, tell the jury whether or not your team or Middle Tennessee State University has a drug testing policy regarding athletes and in particular women's basketball players.
Yes, sir. We do have a drug testing. The training staff takes care of that.
Okay.
And, you know, periodically, 1, 2, 3 times a year, they'll come in and say, we're going to drug test A, B, C, D, whatever girls, you know. And they don't tell me who they're going to drug test. They just say, we're going to drug test 4 of you girls, or we're going to drug test 5 of you girls, or we may drug test the whole team. And that's all they tell me.
Okay, sir. And once they tell you that they're going to run drug tests, are you having conversation with your team about that?
No, sir.
And in addition to the policy at MTSU that the athletic department has in place, do you know whether the NCAA or the National Collegiate Athletic Association has a drug testing policy? And what is that?
They could come in at any time and drug test any one of your players or the whole team, and even in the summer, if they need to know where your players are, if they're back home, which Oak Ridge or Baltimore, Maryland, or wherever, they'll go into their homes and they'll drug test them.
So even during the time that they're away from school and maybe home for the summer, they are subject to being drug tested?
Yes, sir. All athletes are.
Can you say, for instance, for a calendar school year, how many people on the team would be drug tested?
I would probably, we have 15 players. I would say anywhere from 10 to 12 maybe.
Okay, sir. And never know when it's going to happen?
No, sir.
Now, tell us what happens if a member of the team were to fail a drug test.
If they were to fail a drug test, the first time there would be counseling. They would be sent to a counselor. And then, just depending on Chris Massaro, our athletic director, they've got they may have to set out 2 games to that extent. And then if the second time, if you fail a drug test, then you're suspended for maybe a month. And then the third time, you're out.
And if you're out, that means kicked off the team?
Yes, sir.
What happens to your athletic scholarship?
Well, you would no longer be on athletic scholarship.
Now, do you ever, in addition to the policies that are in place, do you ever counsel or discuss with your players the consequences of failing a drug test?
Yes, sir.
And tell us about that, please.
Well, you have discussions 2 or 3 times a year about the fact of who they're running with. You know, you don't know all of their friends, and if you're in a situation where it's a situation where there's alcohol or drugs, then you can call one of the coaches to come and get you. You can call me. When I say one of the coaches, me or one of my assistant coaches, and even the fact that you could call Chris Massaro or Diane Turnham.
And so you encourage them to stay away from that situation?
Yes.
And have you ever discussed with your team what being around someone maybe smoking marijuana would do?
Absolutely.
And what do you tell them?
Well, I don't know if this was the truth or not, but I told them that they were around someone that there might be some secondhand smoke, and if there was some secondhand smoke, if you inhaled it and then you were drug tested, it mattered not that you could possibly lose your scholarship. So if you're in a situation like that, you better be real careful. You need to get away from that because you don't know what the circumstances would be.
You were would it be fair to say you were very concerned about it, or let me put it this, you wanted your players to be very concerned?
Yes, I wanted them to be very concerned about it.
Now, in regards to Miss Stewart, do you know the first year she came, was she on basketball scholarship?
Yes.
And do you know where she lived that year?
She lived on campus.
And does MTSU have what we used to call them jock dorms, but I think the proper term is athletic dorms?
No, they cut that out. The NCAA did.
All right. Was there a particular, or is there a particular place where the athletes may live that's more common than not?
Scarlet Commons is one that you would hope to get your athletes in because it's one of the newest facilities on campus, one of the newest dorms or apartment complexes on campus, and it's one of the nicest ones. So most all of the coaches would want their players to be at Scarlet Commons.
And do you have a policy regarding the girls' basketball team as to whether they can or cannot live off campus?
I did. I don't anymore.
Okay, and tell us about that.
Well, one of the reasons that I kind of looked at it like they're my own daughters, and they are my daughters. My team they're my daughters. But and you have a lot of athletes, male athletes that are around Scarlet Commons, and I thought to myself that it might be better if they wanted to live off campus to allow them. So we tried it. You know, this was kind of a 2-year thing that we were going to try and allow our players to live off campus if they so wanted to.
And in that regard, do you know whether in March of 2011 Tina Stewart was living on campus or off of campus?
She was living off campus.
And you may not know the number, but do you know where she was living?
The apartment complex, but I don't know the number.
Okay. But there would have been at that time a record for
Yes.
you or any of your
Yes.
coaches to
Yes.
know. Now, if a team member was living off campus, was there any way, or were they subject to being checked on?
Yes, sir.
And tell us about that.
My 3 assistant coaches, my 3 female assistant coaches, they would do room checks.
And I noticed you said that your 3 females.
Yes, sir.
Did you ever do room checks
No, sir.
yourself? Had you ever been to Miss Stewart's apartment?
No, sir.
And do you know, when you talk about your assistant coaches, tell me whether or what their duties are, not necessarily in regard to room checks, but does one assistant, for instance, coach the post players and another assistant work on this?
Yes, sir. We have Alex Fuller works with the post players, and Kim Bruton works with the perimeter players, and then Mariska Harris is my basketball operations person, which does all of our scheduling, our hotels and restaurants and whatever.
And in regard to Tina Stewart, was she a post or perimeter
She was
player?
perimeter.
Now, let me ask you this. During her career as a ball player at MTSU, did you know her family?
Yes, sir.
And in particular, her mother and father?
Yes, sir.
Did you know a Monica Jones, who was her sister?
I knew of her, but I didn't know her like her dad and mom.
Can you describe to the jury, please, what the relationship was between you, Miss Stewart's mother and father, and also the relationship you observed between Miss Stewart and her parents?
Well, with all of my parents, I'm not bosom buddies with none of my parents. I know them, I speak to them, they speak to me, and my door's open for them if they need to talk to me. But as far as touching base with them at most games, after a game is when you would see the parents. I know that Tina and her mom and dad were very close. I know that they traveled to places that probably they couldn't afford to go to. I knew that. But they were there in support of their daughter.
And do you know, in regard to Miss Stewart herself, what her goals were? Did you ever discuss that with her?
Yes, sir.
And
Yes,
what was that, please, sir?
Well, Tina was a very goal-oriented person. One of her main priority was getting an education and helping her dad and mom back in Memphis.
Do you know whether or not Miss Stewart had a boyfriend?
Yes, sir.
And who was that, if you know?
KC.
And do you know his last name?
Newman, I believe.
And do you know whether he was an athlete?
Yes, sir.
And was he on scholarship at MTSU?
I'm not sure if he was on scholarship or not. He may have been a walk-on, but he was very much part of the men's basketball program.
And do you know can you describe the relationship you observed between KC and Newman and Tina?
Well, usually I discourage my young ladies from relationships, but in this case, absolutely not, because you could tell that the respect that was there from him to her and her to him, and it was one of those relationships where you could just see that, you know, she started spending a lot of time in the gym working on her game because he was working on his game. And so that's how I observed the relationship. And you know, Tina, I felt like it was okay. And, you know, I had no problem with it.
Do you know whether or not they were in love with each other?
I would say yes, they were.
Now, Coach Insell, I'm going to put this on the screen, and I'm going to zoom out a little bit. And I believe you've seen this before, but it appears to be a website, Middle Tennessee GoBlueRaiders.com, and it says the 2012 Choice Awards, and then it says Women's Basketball 2010-2011 schedule. Have you seen the schedule before?
Yes, sir. I'm sure I have. I mean, it's a 2011 schedule. Yes, sir.
And you could probably recite it to us probably without looking at it, but it appears to start or to have started on November the 4th.
Yes, sir.
And it appears the opponent was Lincoln Memorial.
Yes, sir. That was an exhibition game.
And then it goes on through the fall of 2010 and then on into January and February of 2011. And looking there, I think the first game shows January the 2nd, South Alabama.
Yes, sir.
And it shows in Mobile. I want to ask you if you recall playing on January the 8th at Lafayette, Louisiana.
Yes, sir.
And when would you and the team have left to travel to Lafayette, Louisiana?
On January the 7th.
And tell us about how you go about traveling out of town, how you assemble the team, and how you travel on that particular.
The team meets at Murphy Center, and depending on what our flight, we try to get there 2 hours before, and because of all the luggage that we have and all the training and video equipment. So we probably left out that morning of January the 7th early, probably at 7 or 8 o'clock. We would have met at Murphy Center at maybe 4:30. And then we would have loaded on the Raider Express, rode to the airport, and then from there went and checked in at the whatever flight that we were taking.
And then you would have, I'm assuming you arrived sometime in Lafayette, Louisiana that day, January the 7th.
January the 7th, and then we went to practice that day. We practiced, had a shoot around that day, and then probably a 2-hour practice. And then, then they went out to eat that night. They had a meal that night before the game.
And do you recall, Coach Insell, if January the 7th would have been a Friday?
I would say it would have to be a Friday, but that 8th would be a Saturday. It's a doubleheader, and yes, that would have been a Friday.
And do you know who won that game, by the way?
We did.
Okay. And looking here on the schedule, I believe it said 84-62.
Yes, sir.
Was there, you mentioned it was a doubleheader, and tell us what you mean by that.
Well, the men played after us. We played at one facility. The women at the Lafayette played a different arena than the men. We played our game, went back to the hotel, changed, and then we went and supported our men's program that night.
Okay. And then when would your team have returned to Murfreesboro?
We would return on Sunday.
So from early in the morning Friday, January the 7th, until sometime Sunday, January the 9th, your team and Tina Stewart were out of town and in Lafayette, Louisiana.
Yes, sir. They were with me.
Do you have a policy regarding your team members and cell phones when you're on the road?
Yes, sir.
Tell us what that is.
We take their cell phones up when we leave Murphy Center.
And what is the reason for that?
Well, you don't have any outside distractions like boyfriends and in some cases parents, and you know, it's best just to take them away, and then you don't have all the texting and all the other stuff that goes on. So
Now, do you know whether Miss Stewart's cell phone would have been taken up as a result of that policy?
yes, sir, it would have been taken up.
Now, in all fairness, are you aware of something known as a candy phone?
Yes, sir.
Tell us what that term means.
That's where our team, go over that again, the what phone?
Candy phone.
That's where the team would, maybe a player would hand me a phone that was not their cell phone.
In other words, they would hand you a dummy phone.
Dummy phone.
Do you know if that happened all the time?
No, sir, I don't know if it's happened all the time. I know that it's happened. Kids are kids.
Your Honor, if I could, I would like to make the schedule an exhibit.
Okay, what will that be, Madam Clerk?
5, sir.
Okay, do you consider it 5?
Your Honor, for the record, the schedule is 3 pages.
Okay.
Now, Coach Insell, I want to call your attention to the weekend before March the 2nd, the date that Miss Stewart died, and I believe, if I'm looking at the schedule correctly, you would have had a game on February the 27th with Western Kentucky. Do you recall that ball game?
Yes, sir.
And it indicates it was a home game, and was it?
Yes, sir.
And did Tina Stewart start that game?
No, sir, I don't think so.
And had Miss Stewart been starting on a regular basis that 2010-2011
No, sir.
season?
No, sir.
And tell us why not.
Tina sometimes tried to do too much on the basketball court and would get herself in trouble underneath with some of the larger kids or taller kids. And very quick. And once part of her game that we were working on the perimeter, extremely good outside shooter. And so I put her on the bench to motivate her, and we started another young lady that was doing extremely well. And then when we brought Tina in off the bench, our team got better because she brought in her quickness and her toughness and her shooting touch. And so when we saw that we had better chemistry doing that, at that point I left it like that.
And so having not started the Western Kentucky game, do you know whether she played in that game?
Yes, sir, she played quite a bit. I don't really know how many minutes, but she did play.
And Do you recall that she was put in the game late in the game?
Yes, sir.
And for what reason?
Courtney Jones had fouled out. She was our point guard, and it had been the first time all year that she had fouled out. And I moved Anne Marie Lanning to the point, and I moved Tina Stewart into man Anne Marie Lanning's position on the wing.
And when you put her in, what happened?
Immediately, she hit a three-pointer
And,
that I didn't want her to shoot.
okay. And tell us what happened after that.
She took another one.
Did she?
She missed it. And then at that point, I had to talk to her about the fact that we're trying to run the time off right now, that she needed to use her basketball IQ, and they were going to foul her and Anne Marie.
And knowing that she would probably be the one that would, or one of the players that might be fouled, did you have any concerns about that?
Yes, sir.
Why was that?
She was not a great free throw shooter.
Tell us about that, please, sir.
She had struggled with her free throw shooting, and she felt like she needed to do it Tina's way, and I wanted her to do it my way. And one day I was walking through the gym about a month before that, and Kim Bruton, the perimeter coach, was working on her free throws. And I went over and stood with them, and I told her, I said, if you'll allow me to break your free throw touch down, your shooting down, you know, this is going to help you in shooting your free throws if you'll trust me and believe in me. And she said, okay, I will. And so we broke totally her way she shot free throws down, and I went step by step what I wanted her to do. And at first she didn't do real well, but then she began hitting those free throws, and I could see that her body language, she was happy and satisfied with herself. So now we go through maybe a month of her working with that with Coach Bruton, and I'd see her every day in and after practice working on the way I'd ask her to do it. But she had never been in the line of fire until that Western Kentucky game. And I can remember standing on the sidelines. Immediately, Western fouled her. They had the momentum, and they'd cut it to like 3 points. And they fouled Tina because she's coming in off the bench. And I'm thinking, well, let's see. Right now, we're going to get a chance to see what's going on. And she went to the line, and she did everything like I asked her to do it. And she hit one, and she hit another one. And then I think she hit another one. And I was more happy that she had bought into what I wanted her to do than in her shooting and hitting the free throws, and probably was the reason that we won the ball game. And so after the game, her dad and her were coming up the ramp, and I just finished my radio interview, and the smile on her face and the smile on his face, I'll never forget, because we stopped and I talked about the fact that, you know, she had done exactly what I asked her to do.
And you said you won the game, and I believe looking here, it appears that you won 72-66.
Yes, sir.
When was the next scheduled game after that weekend?
The following Sunday, it would be our first game in the Sun Belt Conference tournament in Hot Springs, Arkansas.
And as a result of the fact that there was roughly a week between games, do you remember if the team practiced that particular weekend?
I gave them off Monday and Tuesday and told them we would come back in on Wednesday and practice.
And Wednesday would have been March the 2nd?
I think so.
Do you recall the last day or the last practice where Miss Stewart, prior to her death, do you recall seeing her at practice?
Yes.
And was there anything unusual about that particular practice in regard to the team situation and Miss Stewart?
Yes.
And tell us about that.
Anne Marie Lanning was our captain. She was the only senior that we had, and she had come to me on Sunday after the ball game and had said that her sister was going in to have a baby on Wednesday. Would I permit her to go and be with her sister? And I said, absolutely.
And as a result of...
Judge, but we approach,
Is that what you're testing?
I object to relevance.
Okay, why is this relevant?
Your Honor, it's going to show, it's building a foundation to what her state of mind was on the day of her death and why it would have been...
Fine, I'll overrule.
And also hearsay would be another objection, Judge. What Ms. Lanning told him.
Okay, what do you say in regard to?
I'm saying that I'm not offering that for the proof of the matter that her sister was having a baby, but that's what she told Coach Insell, and that's the reason she wasn't at practice.
Okay, I'll overrule that objection then. Thank you. Go ahead, sir.
And
Well, there, let me tell you what, hearsay, you may not have heard that definition before. What that means is, it's an out-of-court statement that's introduced, just like he said, but the next term is for the truth of the matter asserted, which is lawyer talk. But what that means is that if they're saying something out of court that they want to use as evidence to say that that actually happened, that would be hearsay, and Mr. Band's objection would be good. But here what they're saying is that it's been introduced to show you why Mr. Insell did this certain act. So it doesn't fall under that hearsay, or it doesn't fall under that definition of hearsay. Everybody understand that? And you'll hear that as we go through that. Sorry to interrupt you, Mr. Watson. Go ahead, sir.
And because Miss Lanning was not going to be there, who would be in charge of playing the point guard?
Well, not in charge of playing the point guard, but in charge of our basketball team.
Okay.
To be Anne Marie was our leader. And, you know, at times during practice, you have times that a leader has to step up and make decisions and maybe calm a kid down or pep one up or whatever, and she was not going to be there that day. And it was an opportunity for me to see Tina Stewart step up and become the leader of our basketball team.
And did she?
Well, I had a meeting with her before practice about this fact that Anne Marie was not going to be here, and that today is your day. You're going to be leading our team next year, and it's a chance for you to show our players that you can handle this situation.
And describe the practice that she had.
Well, we started practice, and after we did our drills and things, we got into the practice, and the first time that Tina was given a chance to really do something, she did okay. Nothing extremely great, nothing negative. Next time she did, you know, we handed her the ball on a certain play, and she did okay. And then the third time, I think she got a little disgusted with herself, and she handed the ball off to one of our freshmen. And my response was to her, I said, typical Tina, a chance to step up and take over this basketball team, and you want to hand the ball off. Well, immediately she checked herself back in, and it was one of the most dynamic, the rest of the day was one of the most dynamic practices that I'd seen her ever have. She was taking charges. She was diving after loose balls. She was finishing on shots. She was running our basketball program like what I had anticipated that she could do. And so after practice, we all circled at the center court, and I made a note of the fact with all the other players, and they were all patting her on the back and everything. And from practice, they went to the weight room, and so I don't go into the weight room. That's Coach Riley's responsibility, and so I always call Coach Riley to see how things went in the weight room. And when I called him that afternoon, he told me how great Tina had done. She was in there. She was patting the other kids on the back. She was leading them. She was doing things that he hadn't seen her do before, and so he was excited about it. And then I met with my coaches, and I can tell you the phrase I used. I said, we've got another player going into the tournaments. We've got another player now. Tina stepped over the line.
And typically, what time would practice, including the weight part of it, be over?
We went from 1:30 to 3:30, and then they went into the weight room from 3:30 to 4:30.
And at 4:30, the team would have been dismissed or free to go back and do whatever they needed to do.
Most of the team had to go to study hall.
And what time would study hall have?
Study hall would have probably been from 5 to 6:30, 5:30 to 6:30 to 7, somewhere in there.
And did Miss Stewart have to go to study hall?
Miss Stewart did not have to go to study hall.
And why was that?
She carried a 2.8 or higher. If you carried a 2.8 or higher, you were not required to go to study hall. I think her grade point average is like 3.2. I'm not sure.
And let me ask you, being around her, of course, as a player for 2.5 years that she was on your team, did you know her habits for hygiene and cleanliness?
Very neat, always just very, very neat.
And would that go for her locker facility in the dressing room also?
Absolutely.
Was it stand out from the other players?
I don't know if it would stand out, but everything was in order. You've got some that just throw their stuff down, you've got some that hang it up, but you've got some that are very, put everything in place, and Tina was one of those.
Coach Insell, how did you find out that something had happened to Miss Stewart?
Well, I was excited about the practice that day, and I called a close friend of mine that's played for me in Shelbyville, that's a lawyer, and we often eat together, and her husband and myself and some of my friends and my son, and I called them to meet me at the Parthenon. And while we had met at the Parthenon, I had just sat down, and Courtney Jones called me and said that some of the football players had come by and said there was something going on in their apartment complex, and that her and Kiki were going back over to see what was going on. And my response was, call me and let me know what's going on, I'll be there. Well, she didn't call after about 5 or 6, 7 minutes, and so I called her back, and when I called her back, she said they're putting Tina in the ambulance. And at that point, I laid my phone down. I really don't know what I did with anything. I got, Alan Farley was there with me that day, and he drove me to the hospital.
And when you went to the hospital, you found out she was dead?
Yes. Yes, sir, I did.
And did you attend any services for Miss Stewart?
Yes, sir.
And tell us about that.
What do you want?
Objection to relevance.
I'll sustain. Next question.
Did your team play in the Sun Belt tournament that
Yes.
week after this?
Yes.
And Coach Insell, I think I neglected to ask you this earlier, but you mentioned that on that weekend of January the 8th, when you all played Louisiana Lafayette, and it was a doubleheader, and the boys played also. Do you know if Casey Anuna was in Lafayette, Louisiana that weekend with the team?
I don't know if he was there or not.
You don't know?
No, sir.
But he could have been.
Yes, sir.
But you know that Tina Stewart
Yes, sir.
was there.
Yes, sir.
And she would not have been in her apartment at 321
No, sir.
Raiders Cross. That's all the questions I have.
Okay. Question, Mr. Matt?
Coach Insell, you've been coaching for a number of years, is that right?
Yes, sir.
And I think you said you were the Shelbyville High School girls coach?
Yes, sir.
And y'all had a name for winning state championships for a number of years, didn't you?
A name?
Well, I mean, you had a
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
You're a great coach, and you you might say no to that, but your record, you've won a lot of games, haven't you?
Yes, sir.
And so when you say Miss Stewart was on an athletic scholarship, how many girls did y'all have to choose from with respect? Let me ask you this. How many athletic scholarships did your team consist of?
15.
Okay. And do you know the pool of girls, the quantity of girls that you would have to select from?
You mean around the country?
Is that your pool around the
Yes, sir.
country?
Yes, sir.
And did y'all scout all around the country?
Yes, sir.
And so would it be a fair statement that someone had to be a great athlete to get one of those athletic
sir.
scholarships? And would that fairly characterize Miss Stewart as well?
Yes, sir. She was a very good athlete.
Now, you mentioned you had a policy with respect to marijuana, and you also said a policy with respect to alcohol. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
And so you didn't allow the girls to drink alcohol?
Well, you don't want them to drink alcohol.
Were you aware about Miss Stewart, whether or not she drank alcohol?
No, sir, I was not aware.
Did you follow her on Twitter?
No, sir, I don't follow anybody on Twitter.
Okay. And you said that she was a resident on MTSU's campus during her freshman year, is that right?
Yes, sir.
And then I guess what was unspoken is she was not a resident of MTSU campus her sophomore and junior year, is that right?
I'm not for sure on her sophomore year. She still could have been a resident her sophomore year, and maybe it was her junior year that she moved off, which would have been this last year.
And so you're not saying that she was at MTSU on campus her sophomore year. You're saying you don't know
Yes, sir.
exactly when.
Yes, sir.
Do you know how many roommates she had at Raiders Crossing?
No, sir.
Your Honor, I'll object to relevance of that.
Tell me why this would be relevant.
May we approach? Well,
Why is it relevant?
We probably do need to approach, Your Honor.
Okay.
Coach Insell, you testified Miss Stewart played on the perimeter, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And would that be, would a guard be another word for that?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And was she one of your guards?
Yes, sir.
And do you know the height of Miss Stewart?
I would say 5'5" or 5'6".
Okay.
We might have listed her at 5'7". You know, we coaches sometimes put an inch or inch and a half on the rosters to kind of throw the other coaches off.
Okay. And they probably do the same to y'all?
Yes, sir, they do.
Now, Miss Stewart would show up for practice, correct?
Yes, sir.
And you would drive these girls hard in practice, wouldn't you?
Yes, sir.
And you pushed them hard?
Yes, sir.
And you ran them a lot?
We condition, and we just don't run to run. I'm one of those coaches that believes in drills with the basketball and just getting out there and running.
Okay. And so describe a week of practice at MTSU.
It's you know, when you ask me to describe it, go through a practice session, or
Yes, sir. And sometimes I ask bad questions. Let me back up. Before the season starts, describe me, so I'm saying before you start playing your games, describe me what a week of practice would look like.
we would spend a lot of time conditioning, and then we'd spend a lot of time on your defensive, offensive strategies, your full court strategies, everything that you might touch on during a game. You would start building just like you'd build a house. You'd start building those strategies with your team early on, and you do that through drills. And you know, you have drills that basically pertain to every part of the game, from the offensive end to the defensive end to the transition to the full court press. So that's what we did.
And would that be several hours a day?
We'd go from 1:30 to about 3:30
Okay.
in the gym.
Now, in addition to conditioning, which is what you just described, did you all spend a period of time weightlifting?
Yes, sir.
And was that on a regular basis?
Yes, sir.
And did Miss Stewart show up for weightlifting?
Yes, sir.
And was she good at that?
We don't, when I say good, when you say good, I wouldn't say that nobody was any better than anybody else. I mean, they just, Coach Riley would put them through their weight room, whatever it was, you know.
To make them strong?
Yes, sir.
Now, you talked a minute ago about this candy phone. You remember that?
Mm-hmm.
And a candy phone, let me see if I understood what you were saying.
I never heard it called a candy phone, but that's what it was called.
Okay. Well, General Whitesell asked you, did you know what a candy phone was? And I think what you said is yes. And then basically what he said is it's where the girls give you a phone. You think they represent one thing to you, but then they go and do something 100% different.
Yes, sir.
And does it surprise you that the testimony in court today has been that Ms. Stewart had a candy phone?
I don't know if she had one or not. I know that some of the girls have done that before.
Now, could you characterize Ms. Stewart as strong-willed?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I think you said she's tough.
Yes, sir.
She brought toughness to the floor.
Yes, sir.
And what you described with the free throw shooting, I would assume, and you tell me if I'm wrong here, that you didn't wait till her third year to try to tell her how to shoot a free throw, did you?
No, sir.
You'd been trying to tell her for 2.5 years, and she just wouldn't listen to you. Isn't that right?
Well, she would listen.
Well, she didn't listen to your satisfaction, or you wouldn't still been trying to teach her how to do it.
Well, you're right.
Thank you, Mr. Insell.
Yes, sir.
Other questions, Mr. Watson?
Coach Insell, is it unusual to have to coach a player?
You got to coach them all.
Yes, sir. That's why they have you.
Yes, sir.
That's all.
No, sir. Well, it's not a place to laugh. If that's going to be necessary, you can't be in here. So, a little bit's okay, but that's not the way this thing's going to run. All right, any questions from our jurors?
And I had one submitted earlier, but it was not submitted correctly. You got to give it to Ms. Kimbrough over here, so obviously I couldn't ask that. Yeah, and the purpose of questioning really is to not to develop theories of your own, but really to ask to kind of fill in the gaps if there's something like that. And I'm going to find both these questions are inappropriate. So I'm not going to ask either one of them. Counsel, I'll disclose those to you in just a moment. All right, anybody else got any other questions? Okay, sir, you can step down. You're free to stay in the court. We're free to go.